The newborn had stopped crying. 3 weeks old, born too early, too fragile, and now too silent. The 2 children clung to their mother's legs, lips turning blue, fingers beyond feeling. And when the black SUV stopped in the middle of the blizzard, the man who stepped out wasn't just anyone. Tattoos crawled up his neck, a scar traced his cheek, and eyes gray as winter steel took in everything. The widow, the bruises she tried to hide, the scar on her wrist that told its own story. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask why she was running. He asked one thing, voice quiet but cold enough to freeze the air itself. Who did this to you? Because whoever drove a mother and her 3 children into a storm like this had just made the worst mistake of their life, and the man they called the Silent King never left mistakes unfinished. If this satisfying story satisfies you, hit that subscribe button and share with your friends. Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. Now, let's get back into the storm. The snowstorm had swallowed the forest road whole. Sky and ground dissolved into one merciless, endless void, where direction became an illusion and time was measured only by shivering. The wind tore through the pine trees like a predator on the hunt, as if it knew exactly where she was. This was the kind of storm that erased footprints, erased choices, erased the future itself. Sophia Hartley stood there, her body moving on memory rather than strength. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. Her fingers had passed beyond numbness into something clumsy and foreign, barely responsive at all. Her chest felt crushed, as though the cold had crawled inside her and wrapped itself around her ribs, tightening with every breath. The thin coat had been soaked long ago, and no longer held even a trace of warmth. But Sophia was not thinking about herself. She was thinking about the 3-week-old baby in her arms. Born 2 weeks early, the child the doctors had warned must be kept especially warm to survive. And now that baby lay in the middle of a storm at -15 degrees. 2 hours earlier, everything had been different. Sophia had been in a cheap rental room on the edge of the city, where she had been hiding for 3 days after her mother-in-law threw her out onto the street. The room was so small that the 3 children and their mother shared a single narrow bed, but at least it had 4 walls and a door that could be locked. At least the children were warm. Emma was scribbling on a scrap of paper she had found. Lucas was curled up asleep. Noah had just finished feeding and was sleeping soundly. Then the pounding came at the door. Hard, urgent, wrong. Sophia knew instantly it was not hotel staff. She knew even before the voice came through the door. "Open the door, Sophia. We know you are in there." The voice was thick with a Russian accent, cold and unhurried. One of Volkov's men. One of the men working for the man her husband owed $200,000. One of the men who had threatened to take Emma if the debt was not paid. "Your husband is dead, but the debt is not," the voice continued. "You have 2 choices. Open the door and talk like an adult, or we break it down and take the little girl. The boss says your daughter is pretty enough to cover a good portion." Sophia's heart stopped. She looked at Emma, her 6-year-old daughter staring up at her with wide, terrified eyes. "Mommy, who is it?" Emma whispered. Sophia did not answer. She moved. She scooped Noah into her arms, pulled Lucas from the bed, grabbed Emma's hand and ran for the bathroom window. The room was on the ground floor, the window opening into the alley behind the building. She pushed Emma out first, then helped Lucas through, then climbed out herself with Noah in her arms just as the pounding turned into splintering wood. They ran. Sophia did not know where, only that she had to run. No money, no phone, no car, only survival instinct and 3 children. She ran to the bus stop, but the last bus had already gone. She ran to the highway, but no car stopped. And then the snowstorm came. It came as if the world itself had turned against her. It came as if she had been cursed to endure everything to the very end. Sophia kept walking, kept moving, dragging 2 crying children and clutching the baby who was growing frighteningly quiet. She did not know how long she walked. It could have been 1 hour. It could have been 2. Time lost all meaning when the body began to give up. And then headlights appeared. A black SUV pulled to a stop. A man stepped out, and the question came, cutting through the snowstorm, cutting through the fear, cutting through everything she thought she knew about this world. "Who did this to you?" Sophia couldn't answer. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her mind struggled to process the question. Who had done what? What did he want? Who was he? The man standing in front of her looked like a ghost, stepping out of the storm, tall, solid, black hair slicked back, now coated with a thin layer of snow. A long black coat hung open despite the cutting cold. And his gaze, it was piercing and unyielding, cutting through the darkness like a blade, reading every detail of her as if he were reading a sentence already past. Sophia instinctively stepped back, pulling the two children behind her. Her mind filled with images, newspaper headlines, whispered stories traded in kitchens and parking lots. Men in black cars, men who don't ask questions, men who make people disappear. But this man had asked a question, and it wasn't the one she'd expected. Behind him, 3 other men stepped out of the vehicle, silent, disciplined, their faces half hidden by darkness and snow. One had graying hair and the posture of a soldier. One was younger, broad-shouldered, his hands buried in his coat pockets. The third stood slightly apart, his eyes sweeping the tree line as if danger could come from anywhere. They didn't speak. They didn't move. They simply stood there like sentinels. Marcus Ravenna took one step closer to Sophia. Snow crunched beneath expensive leather shoes that didn't belong in a place like this. His gray eyes moved slowly from her face to the baby in her arms, then to the 2 children clinging to her legs with purple fingers and pale blue lips. He saw the soaked coat that no longer protected her. He saw the children's torn gloves. He saw the old bruise on her cheekbone that even the snow couldn't hide. He saw the scar on her wrist when her sleeve slid back. He read everything. He understood everything. And something in his eyes changed. Not softness, recognition. "You're shaking," Marcus said, not as a question but a statement. "The children are freezing. I don't know who you are." Sophia finally found her voice, hoarse and fragile. "Please don't hurt us." Marcus didn't react to the plea. Instead, he began unbuttoning his coat, one button at a time, slow, deliberate. Sophia's fear spiked. What is he doing? He slid the coat from his shoulders in one smooth motion and stepped forward. Sophia tried to retreat, but her legs wouldn't obey. Before she could react, he draped the coat over her shoulders. The weight settled suddenly, heavy and warm enough that she nearly cried. The smell of leather, the scent of something expensive she couldn't name, and warmth, the warmth of his body still clinging to the fabric. "Get in the car," Marcus said, his voice no louder than a whisper, yet somehow cutting straight through the wind. "We're not doing this out here. I don't even know who you are," Sophia repeated, her voice trembling. His steely stare anchored her in place, demanding her full attention. "Marcus Ravenna," he said the name as if it answered a question she hadn't asked. "And you're not going to die on this road." It wasn't a promise. It was an order. Sophia stood frozen between the instinct to run and the brutal awareness that she couldn't anymore. Her legs felt like lead. Her children were fading. The baby in her arms hadn't made a sound for a long time. And the man in front of her, the man with tattoos climbing his neck and a scar running along his cheek, the man who radiated a kind of power that made the air around him feel thick and heavy, stood in the snowstorm without a coat and waited. He didn't rush her. He didn't threaten. He simply waited. As if he had all the time in the world, and she had none left. "Mommy," Emma's voice rose, small and broken. "I'm so cold." And that sentence shattered everything. Sophia stepped toward the SUV. The first step was the hardest. Sophia felt like she was stepping into a wolf's mouth. But even a wolf's mouth was warmer than the storm swallowing her second by second. She staggered, her left leg nearly buckling. But before she could fall, the gray-haired man appeared at her side. "Easy now," he said, his voice low and rough, but not without gentleness. "Let me help with the children." Sophia instinctively tightened Noah against her chest and pulled Emma closer. Her eyes stayed sharp and wary on the stranger. He looked like an old soldier, a weathered face etched with lines that told stories of years lived and things seen. But his eyes weren't cold the way she'd expected. They were tired, knowing, and strangely, trustworthy. "Jerome," Marcus said from behind, his tone clipped like an order that needed no explanation. Jerome nodded and lowered himself to Emma's eye level. The little girl shrank back, pressing into her mother's leg, but Jerome didn't rush her. "Hey there, kiddo," he said softly. "I've got a daughter your age. She's afraid of strangers too, just like you. But there's heat in the car, and I think your fingers need to warm up before they get angry and leave you behind." Emma didn't smile, but the panic in her eyes eased just a little. She looked up at her mother, waiting for permission. And Sophia, with her heart in pieces and her mind screaming warnings, nodded, because what choice did she have? Because her 6-year-old daughter was freezing, and she couldn't do anything except trust a stranger in the middle of a snowstorm. Jerome stood and held out his hand. Emma hesitated for a second, then placed her small purple fingers into his large, rough palm. Jerome didn't grip tightly. He held her gently, as if he were holding something precious and fragile. Lucas was different. The 4-year-old hadn't spoken a word since they'd run. He clung to his mother's coat, his eyes empty, staring into nothing as if his soul had already stepped away. When Jerome turned to him, Lucas didn't react. He didn't pull back. He didn't move forward. He just stood there, a small frozen statue. Jerome didn't force him. He simply pulled off his glove and rested his bare hand lightly on Lucas's head. "Come on, kid," he said. "Let's get you inside." And then, as if a switch had been flipped, Lucas moved. He still didn't speak. He still didn't look up. But he walked. Sophia followed, her legs moving like a machine. The SUV door opened, and she climbed inside. Noah still pressed tight against her chest. Warmth hit her like a wall. It was so intense it made her dizzy. Hot, warm, alive. Sophia didn't realize she was crying until tears fell onto Noah's cheek. The heater blasted at full power, warm air pushing into every gap in her soaked clothes, seeping into bones that had gone numb. Jerome settled Emma into a seat and wrapped her in a blanket that seemed to appear from nowhere. Lucas sat beside his sister, still silent, but his shoulders no longer shook. Sophia looked down at Noah. His lips were still blue, his face still pale, but when she pressed her cheek to his chest, she felt it. A heartbeat. Weak, slow, but there, still beating. "Thank God," Sophia whispered, not knowing who she was thanking. God? The universe? Or the man climbing into the front seat, snow sliding from his dark hair, his thin shirt clinging damply to his shoulders? Marcus Ravenna didn't turn to look at her. He spoke only one word to the driver. Home. The SUV rolled forward, swallowing the snow-covered road beneath it, and for the first time in hours, in days, in weeks, Sophia felt something other than fear. She didn't know what it was. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was just warmth. But whatever it was, she clung to it like life itself. Sophia didn't know how long the drive lasted. She sat suspended between waking and sleep, the heat from the heater slowly seeping into her frozen body, bringing with it a heavy, dragging drowsiness. Emma had fallen asleep, her head resting against her mother's shoulder, her breathing steady. Lucas sat beside them, his eyes still open but empty, staring out the snow-coated window. Noah lay quiet in her arms, warmer than before yet still frightening in his silence. Marcus sat in the front seat, never turning around, never speaking, but Sophia could see him on the phone, his voice low, speaking in a language she didn't understand. It could have been Italian, it could have been orders, it could have been both. She didn't ask. She didn't have the strength to ask anymore. It wasn't until the SUV turned through a massive iron gate that Sophia truly became alert. The gate opened automatically, revealing a long stone-paved drive, flanked by trees buried under white snow. Lights blazed along both sides like a fallen galaxy stretched across the ground, and at the end of the drive, the mansion appeared. Sophia stopped breathing. It wasn't a house, it was a palace, 3 stories tall, a gray stone facade with Roman-style columns, large windows glowing with warm golden light. Snow rested on the roof like delicate white lace, making the entire structure look as though it had stepped out of a fairy tale. But this wasn't a fairy tale. Sophia knew that. No one lived in places like this on honest wages. The vehicle stopped at the front entrance. Massive oak doors swung open, warm light spilling out along with an older woman dressed in black. Silver hair pinned neatly back, her expression stern but her eyes softening when they landed on the children. "Rosa," Marcus said as he stepped out of the car. "Prepare rooms. 4 of them. The doctor is on the way." The woman named Rosa nodded without a word and turned back inside, her steps brisk despite her age. Jerome opened the door for Sophia and gently lifted the drowsy Emma into his arms. Lucas climbed out on his own, still moving like a silent shadow. Sophia held Noah tight and stepped into the mansion, each step feeling like she was crossing into another world. Inside was even more overwhelming than the outside. The main hall stretched vast and high, a crystal chandelier scattering light across the space. A double staircase curved upward, its railing intricately carved. Oil paintings lined the walls, antiques perhaps, worth more than the cheap room she'd fled only hours earlier. Sophia stood there, soaked and ragged, holding her newborn, feeling like a stain in a museum. "Upstairs," Marcus said, already several steps ahead, though she hadn't seen him move. "The room is ready." Sophia wanted to ask why. Why was he helping her? What did he want? What would she have to pay? But Noah shifted in her arms, a weak sound slipping from his lips, and every question dissolved. Her child needed help. Everything else could wait. The room she was taken to was 3 times the size of her old apartment. A king-size bed with pristine white sheets, a fire burning in the fireplace, thick carpets soft beneath her feet. Rosa had laid out dry clothes, warm towels, and a small bottle on the table. "The doctor will be here in 10 minutes, Rosa said, her voice carrying a gentle Italian lilt. "Change the children first. I'll bring food up." Sophia nodded, not trusting her voice. Rosa left, and Sophia began peeling away the wet clothes from Emma, then Lucas, then Noah. Her hands still shook. She didn't know whether from cold or shock. A knock came just as she finished wrapping Noah in a warm towel. A woman entered, around 50 years old, brown hair threaded with gray, a kind face with the sharp eyes of someone used to seeing illness for what it was. She carried a medical bag and a calm, professional presence that made Sophia breathe again. "I'm Dr. Elena Corsetti," the woman said, her voice warm but firm. "Let me see the children, the youngest first." Sophia placed Noah into Dr. Elena's arms, and for the first time in that long, terrifying night, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, they would survive this night. Dr. Elena placed Noah on the bed, her hands moving swiftly and with precise purpose. Sophia stood beside her, her hands clenched together so tightly that her nails dug into her palms without her realizing it. Emma and Lucas sat on the small sofa in the corner of the room, wrapped in warm blankets by Rosa, yet both of them were watching their baby brother with worry far beyond their years. Elena used her stethoscope to check Noah's heart and lungs, her brows drawing together. She checked his temperature, his pupils, his reflexes. Every second that passed felt like a year inside Sophia's mind. "Moderate to severe hypothermia," Elena said, her voice calm but grave. "How premature was he?" 2 weeks, Sophia whispered. "He was born 2 weeks early. The doctor said he needed special warmth during the first month." Elena nodded, offering no comment on the obvious failure to keep the baby warm. She pulled a thermal blanket from her medical bag and began wrapping it around the tiny body. "I need warm water and towels," she said to Rosa at the doorway. "About 37 degrees. Not hotter." Rosa disappeared. Elena kept working, checking Noah's breathing. Then she stopped. Sophia saw the change on the doctor's face before a word was spoken. The professional calm vanished, replaced by the sharp focus of someone facing an emergency. "He's not breathing," Elena said, her voice still controlled but suddenly urgent. "Everyone out. Now." "No." Sophia lunged forward, but a hand stopped her. Marcus. She didn't know when he'd entered the room, but he was right behind her, his hand on her shoulder, firm enough to hold her in place. "Let the doctor work," he said, his voice low and steady. "You won't help by panicking." Sophia didn't hear him. She saw only Noah, her son, 3 weeks old, lying motionless on the bed, his tiny chest no longer rising. "My baby," she screamed, her voice shattering like glass. "My baby isn't breathing. Please save my baby." Elena didn't react to the cry. She was already performing infant CPR, 2 fingers placed precisely on Noah's chest, pressing gently but rhythmically. 1, 2, 3. Then she bent down and delivered a short breath into the baby's mouth. Again. 1, 2, 3. Breathe. Sophia collapsed. Her legs could no longer hold her weight. She would have fallen if Marcus hadn't caught her, pulling her back against him. She no longer had the strength to fight, no longer had the strength to fear this man. She could only watch her son and pray to anyone who might be listening. Emma began to cry. "Mommy, what's wrong with Noah?" Her daughter's sob tore through Sophia's heart all over again. She wanted to reach for Emma, to tell her everything would be all right, but she couldn't, because she didn't know if it would be. Rosa reappeared at the door with a basin of warm water and towels, but she stood frozen, unable to enter, her eyes locked on the scene at the bed. 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, each one an eternity. Elena continued the resuscitation, sweat beading on her face, though the room wasn't hot. And then, just when Sophia thought she would die alongside her son, it happened. A cry. Weak, hoarse, but a cry. Noah cried. His tiny chest began to rise and fall. His little fingers curled. His lips moved. Elena let out a long breath, the first sign of how tense she'd been. "He's breathing again," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "He's stable now." Sophia heard the words, but they didn't register. They meant nothing. Only Noah's cry was real. The cry she'd been begging to hear for hours. The cry that meant life. "My baby," Sophia whispered. "My son." She tried to stand, but the world began to spin. The room tilted. The light blurred. She heard someone calling her name. Maybe Elena, maybe Marcus. She couldn't tell. Everything crashed down at once. The exhaustion, the terror, the relief. Her body finally surrendered after fighting through the entire night. Sophia lost consciousness in the arms of a man she didn't even know was friend or enemy. with her son's cry echoing in her ears like the most beautiful music she'd ever heard. Light was the first thing Sophia noticed. Not the harsh light of the snowstorm, not the suffocating darkness of the cheap room she had fled. It was warm, gentle light, filtered through thin white curtains, and spilling softly onto the bed where she lay. She blinked, trying to shape the space around her. A high ceiling traced with delicate detailing, a small crystal chandelier, cream-colored walls adorned with landscape paintings, and the bed beneath her, so soft it felt as though she were sinking into clouds. This wasn't her home. Memory rushed back like a wave. The snowstorm, the running, the black SUV, the man with gray eyes, and Noah. Noah had stopped breathing. Sophia shot upright, her heart racing wildly. "My baby," she gasped, her voice raw. "Where are my children?" "Easy now." A voice came from the corner of the room. Rosa, the older silver-haired woman she had seen the night before, sat in an armchair by the window, a closed book resting in her hands. She rose and walked toward Sophia with calm, measured steps. "The children are fine," Rosa said, her voice carrying the same gentle Italian lilt as before. "The two older ones are sleeping in the room next door. The baby is in a separate room with Dr. Elena staying close." Sophia tried to stand, but dizziness forced her back down. Rosa's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, not forcing her, just steadying her. "You fainted last night," Rosa explained. "Exhaustion, dehydration, mild hypothermia. Dr. Elena says you need at least another day of rest before moving much." "Noah," Sophia said, her voice trembling. "My son, he stopped breathing. I saw him stop breathing." Rosa nodded, her eyes soft with understanding. "Yes, he stopped breathing for about 40 seconds. But Dr. Elena resuscitated him in time. He started breathing again and is recovering well. His body temperature is back to normal. He's crying and feeding now." She paused, a small smile touching her otherwise stern face. "In fact, he cries quite loudly, as if protesting that someone let him get that cold in the first place." Sophia couldn't hold back a sob. Tears spilled over, not from pain but from relief. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. Noah was alive. Her son was alive. Rosa said nothing. She simply stood there, one hand resting gently on Sophia's back in silent comfort. She let her cry, without rushing her, without judgment. When the sobs finally eased, Sophia looked up, her eyes red but clearer. "I want to see my children," she said. "Please let me see my children." Rosa nodded. "I will take you, but first, you need to eat something. How long has it been since you last ate?" Sophia opened her mouth to answer, then stopped. She couldn't remember. When was her last meal? Yesterday, the day before. She had given all the remaining food to the children before they ran. She had only drunk water herself. "I thought so," Rosa said, as if the silence had answered for her. She left the room and returned a few minutes later with a tray. Hot porridge, bread, fruit, and a glass of orange juice. "Eat it all," Rosa said, setting the tray on the bed. "Then I'll take you to the children." Sophia looked at the food, then at Rosa. "Why?" she asked, her voice quiet but filled with suspicion. "Why are you helping me? Why is he helping me? What do you want?" Rosa studied her for a long moment, her aged eyes holding something Sophia couldn't read. "That is a question you should ask my employer," she replied. "As for me, I simply do what needs to be done." She turned toward the door, then paused. "Eat. Your children need a mother who's strong." And then she left, leaving Sophia alone with the tray of food and thousands of unanswered questions. Sophia ate everything on the tray, even though she didn't feel hungry. She ate because Rosa was right. The children needed a mother who was strong. When she finished, Rosa led her to the next room where Emma and Lucas were sleeping. The two children were curled together on a large bed, wrapped in warm blankets, their faces peaceful for the first time in days. Sophia stood there watching them for a long moment, tears rising again, but she didn't let them fall. Then Rosa took her to Noah's room. Dr. Elena was seated beside a small crib, writing notes in a pad. When she saw Sophia, she stood and smiled. "He's doing very well," Elena said. "His temperature is stable, his heart rate is strong, and he's fed twice since last night. He's a little fighter." Sophia stepped to the crib and looked down at her son. Noah was sleeping, his lips pink instead of blue, his tiny chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. She reached out and brushed her fingers lightly over his cheek, and the baby stirred, his lips moving as if he were dreaming. She stood there for a long time until Rosa appeared at the doorway. "Mrs. Hartley," Rosa said, her tone more formal than before. The boss would like to see you in the study. Sophia's heart tightened. She knew this moment would come. Nothing in this world was given freely. She had learned that lesson long ago. The children will stay here with me, Elena said, reading the worry in Sophia's eyes. You go. Sophia nodded and followed Rosa. They walked down a long corridor lined with oil paintings and antiques, down the staircase, through the main hall, and stopped before a heavy oak door. Rosa knocked twice, then opened it and gestured for Sophia to enter. Marcus Ravenna's study was a large room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a fire burning in the hearth, and a massive wooden desk at the center. Behind it sat the man from the night before, firelight casting shadows across his sharp features and the scar along his cheek. He had changed clothes. A perfect black three-piece suit, not a crease in sight, his hair slicked back neatly. He looked more like a businessman than the man who had stood coatless in a snowstorm, but his gray eyes were the same, cold, sharp, seeing everything. Sit, Marcus said, indicating the chair across from him. Sophia sat, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap to hide the trembling. She didn't know what to say, so she waited. Marcus studied her in silence for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice low and even, just as it had been the night before. How are the children? The question caught her off guard. Sophia blinked. Better? She answered carefully. Noah is recovering. Dr. Elena says he's going to be fine. Marcus nodded, as if that was what he'd expected. Then he went straight to the point, without detours. Who is coming after you? Sophia stayed silent. She didn't know how much to say, how much to keep back. This man had saved her, yes, but she didn't know who he was, what he wanted, or what he would do with the truth. Don't lie, Marcus said, as if he could read her thoughts. I'll know, and I don't like being deceived. It wasn't a question. It was a warning. Sophia took a deep breath. She met those cold, gray eyes and made a decision. If he meant to hurt her, he would have already. If he wanted something, she would find out soon enough. But right now, she needed help, and he was the only one offering it. My husband, Sophia began, her voice quiet but steady. Daniel Hartley. He died 8 weeks ago in a car accident. At least, that's what the police said. She paused, swallowing hard. After the funeral, men came to see me. They said Daniel owed them money, a lot of money, $200,000, and if I didn't pay, they would take my daughter. Marcus didn't react. No surprise, no anger. He simply listened, his gray eyes never leaving her face. Who are they? He asked. Sophia swallowed. Volkov. The man in charge is named Nikolai Volkov. And for the first time since she had entered the room, she saw something change in Marcus Ravenna's eyes. Not surprise, recognition, and something far darker, far more dangerous. Volkov. Marcus repeated the name, his voice flat like a frozen lake, with something dangerous moving beneath the surface. Go on. Sophia closed her eyes for a second, drew in a deep breath, then began telling the story she had never told anyone. I met Daniel when I was 22, she said, her voice quiet but steady. He was an accountant at a small firm, polite, attentive. My parents died when I was 18. I had no relatives. Daniel appeared like a savior. He said exactly what I needed to hear, did exactly what made me trust him. We married after 1 year of dating. She paused, her hands tightly interlaced in her lap. Everything changed after the wedding. Not immediately. Daniel was good at hiding who he really was. The first time he hit me was when I was 3 months pregnant with Emma. I said something wrong. I don't even remember what. He slapped me. Then he apologized. Then he cried. He said he'd never do it again. Sophia looked down at her wrist, where a faint scar was still visible under the light. I believed him, she continued. Or maybe I chose to believe him because I had nowhere to go. No one to turn to. But it happened again, and again. And it got worse. He never hit my face because he didn't want anyone to see. Only places clothes could cover. And he always apologized afterward. Always promised he'd change. Marcus remained still, not interrupting, not commenting. Those gray eyes stayed on her, listening, absorbing every detail. I discovered the gambling when Lucas was 1 year old, Sophia said. Daniel started coming home later. Money disappeared from our account without explanation. He said it was investments, said work required expenses. I was foolish enough to believe him, until the first creditor showed up at our door. She took a shaky breath. That was the first time I knew about the debt. Daniel borrowed to gamble, lost, then borrowed more to recover. An endless spiral. He hit me worse after every loss, blamed me for bringing bad luck, for not earning enough, for existing. This scar, she lifted her wrist, wasn't self-inflicted. Daniel shoved me into a glass door when I asked about a large withdrawal. The doctor asked what happened. I said it was an accident. I was 4 months pregnant with Noah then. Heavy silence filled the room. The fire crackled in the hearth, but the sound only made the quiet sharper. When I was 7 months pregnant with Noah, Daniel told me we were going to lose the house, Sophia continued. He had mortgaged everything without telling me. I begged him to stop, to find a solution. He hit me. I went into labor early because of that beating. Noah was born 2 weeks early, fragile, underweight, needing special care, and Daniel didn't even come to the hospital. Bitterness edged Sophia's voice. Then he died. 8 weeks ago, his car went off a cliff on a mountain road. The police said it was an accident, loss of control. But I don't believe it. Daniel was an excellent driver, and he was going somewhere at 2 a.m. without telling anyone. She looked straight at Marcus. I think they killed him, the people he owed money to. Volkov, Marcus said. Not as a question. Sophia nodded. Volkov showed up 1 week after the funeral, came straight to my mother-in-law's apartment, where I was staying because I had nowhere else. He brought 2 men with him. They didn't threaten directly. They didn't need to. Their presence was the threat. Volkov said Daniel owed $200,000, plus interest. And now the debt was mine. She swallowed hard. I told him I didn't have the money. Daniel had spent everything. My mother-in-law threw me out that same day, said I brought bad luck to her son. I sold everything I had left. My mother's jewelry, clothes, anything I could sell. Almost $20,000. I gave it to Volkov. He laughed. Said that was just 1 month of interest. Then he looked at Emma. Sophia's voice tightened, her eyes red but dry. She had cried too much already. He said my daughter was pretty. Said if I didn't have money, there were other ways to pay a debt. Said there were people who would pay very well for a 6-year-old blonde girl with blue eyes. Sophia looked at Marcus, and for the first time she let him see the smoldering rage inside her. I ran that night, took the children. No plan, no money, only knowing I had to get my daughter out of his reach. We hid for 3 days before they found us. Last night they pounded on the door of the cheap room, threatened to take Emma. I ran. Ran into the snowstorm because it was the only choice. And then your car appeared. Sophia stopped, breathing hard as if she had run a marathon. The story was finished. Everything was exposed. She sat there, emotionally stripped bare, waiting for the reaction of the man across from her. Marcus Ravenna was silent for a long time. Then he stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the snow still falling. When he turned back, something in his expression shifted. The flinty hardness in his look had been replaced by a dangerous fire. Something else had taken its place. Something far more dangerous. Volkov is operating on my territory, Marcus said, his voice low and even like the growl of a predator. Without permission. And he threatened children. He looked at Sophia, and she shivered at the intensity in his gaze. He's just made the last mistake of his life. Marcus left the study after telling Sophia to rest and stay with her children. He didn't explain anything further, didn't make promises, simply walked away with the steady steps of a man who already had a plan. Sophia watched his silhouette disappear beyond the door, unsure whether she should feel relieved or more afraid. She had placed her fate and her children's lives into the hands of a complete stranger. A man she suspected was no cleaner than the ones hunting her, but she had no other choice. Marcus went straight to the meeting room in the basement of the estate, where the most important discussions of the Ravenna family took place. Jerome was already there, standing by the wall with the posture of a soldier awaiting orders. Vince sat at the head of the table, one leg draped over the chair beside him with his usual careless air. Carlo, the 60-year-old advisor with snow-white hair and eyes still sharp as knives, sat silently in the corner, turning the family signet ring on his ring finger. Volkov, Marcus said the moment he entered, without introductions or explanation. He's operating on our land, loan sharking, threatening women and children. Jerome nodded, his expression unchanged. I've heard some rumors. He moved in about 6 months ago, started in the southern districts. I thought you knew. I knew he was here, Marcus said as he took the main chair, his gray eyes cold as steel. I didn't know what he was doing, and I didn't know he was bold enough to threaten the kidnapping of a 6-year-old child to collect a debt. Vince dropped his leg from the chair and sat up straight, surprise flashing across his face. Wait, threatening to kidnap kids? Is he insane? No, Marcus replied. He thinks no one cares. He thinks a widow with no protection is easy prey. He's wrong. Vince studied Marcus for a long moment, then leaned back and crossed his arms. Hold on. You're talking about the woman you brought back last night? Her and the 3 kids? Marcus didn't answer, and the silence was answer enough. Vince sighed and shook his head. Cousin, I get wanting to help. But she's not our problem. She's not family, not an ally, not anyone. Just a stranger you picked up off the road. We can't start a war with Volkov over a stranger. Children are my business. Marcus cut in, his voice no louder but far sharper. They always have been. Vince opened his mouth to argue, but Jerome placed a hand on his shoulder and gave a small shake of his head. Vince looked at Jerome, then at Marcus, then at Carlo as if searching for support. Carlo remained silent, his aged eyes observing everything without comment. Marcus stared into the space ahead of him, and for a brief moment, he wasn't in this room anymore. He was in a small house outside Boston, 24 years earlier. He was 13, thin and weak, hiding in a closet because his mother had told him to. Through the crack in the door, he saw everything. Men breaking in, his mother screaming, his sister crying, Isabella. His little sister, 10 years old, curly black hair, big eyes that always looked at him like he was a hero. She was curled in the corner, clutching the worn teddy bear he'd given her for her birthday. Then the gunshots came. 1, 2, 3. His mother fell. Isabella fell. Blood spread across the wooden floor, soaking into the teddy bear. Marcus wanted to scream, to run out, to do anything, but he couldn't. He was only 13, helpless and terrified, watching his mother and sister die in front of him, unable to move. His father found him 3 hours later, still hiding in the closet, eyes empty, unable to speak. 1 week later, his father hanged himself, leaving Marcus alone in the world. Marcus. Carlo's voice pulled him back to the present. He blinked, shoved the memory back where it belonged, locking it behind the walls he'd built over 24 years. Are you all right? Carlo asked, his voice old but full of concern. He was the only one in the room who knew that past. He had been there since Marcus was taken in by his grandfather, had watched the shattered boy become the most dangerous man in the Northeast. I'm fine, Marcus replied, his voice once again cold and controlled. Vince was about to speak, but Carlo spoke first. The boy back then couldn't save his sister, he said, his voice low and deliberate. The man today can save these children. Silence fell over the room. Vince looked from Carlo to Marcus, and something in his eyes shifted. No more resistance, only understanding. Jerome remained still as stone, waiting for orders. Marcus stood and placed both hands on the table. Summon Volkov, he said, his voice cold as ice. Tell him the Silent King wants to talk, and if he has any sense at all, he won't make me ask twice. The meeting was arranged for the following afternoon at an abandoned warehouse in the western industrial district of the city. Neutral ground. According to the unwritten rules of the underworld, neither side held a territorial advantage. Neither side was allowed more than 3 men. Marcus arrived exactly on time. Neither early nor late. Jerome drove. Vince sat in the passenger seat, and Carlo stayed behind because Marcus didn't want the elderly advisor exposed to the cold of an unheated warehouse. When the black SUV stopped in front of the building, a black Mercedes was already waiting. Volkov had arrived first, a subtle display of disrespect that Marcus noted without comment. 3 men stood beside the Mercedes, all wearing long black coats, their hands buried in their pockets in a way that made it clear they were holding weapons. One of them was built like a bear, his face covered in scars. Almost certainly Sergei, the enforcer Marcus had heard rumors about. Marcus stepped out of the vehicle, neither rushed nor slow. Jerome and Vince followed, keeping just enough distance to react if anything went wrong. Cold wind swept through the deserted industrial zone, carrying the scent of rusted metal and old machine oil. They entered the warehouse through a corroded steel door, the interior empty, except for a few rotting wooden crates and a metal table positioned at the center. A flickering neon light overhead cast a ghostly glow that made the place feel like a scene from a horror film. Volkov was already seated on one side of the table, his hands resting in front of him, gold rings gleaming on his fingers. He looked to be around 48, pale blonde hair streaked with gray, a coarse face dominated by a nose that had been broken more than once. His light blue eyes were cold and calculating, but Marcus recognized something else beneath them. Arrogance. The confidence of a man who had never faced a real opponent. Ravenna, Volkov spoke first, his thick Russian accent carrying a veneer of false courtesy. An honor to meet the Silent King. I've heard a great deal about you. Marcus didn't sit. He stood across from Volkov, gray eyes fixed steadily on the pale blue ones opposite him. Silence stretched for several seconds, long enough for Volkov to begin feeling uneasy despite his efforts to hide it. What do you want? Volkov asked when the silence became unbearable. I'm a busy man. Sophia Hartley, Marcus said, ignoring the question and going straight to the point. Volkov blinked, then a slow smile spread across his mouth. Ah, the little widow. He nodded. She ran to the Silent King for help? Interesting. I didn't know she had any connection to you. She didn't, Marcus replied flatly. Not until you drove her and 3 children into a snowstorm to die. Now she's under my protection. Volkov's smile faded. He studied Marcus more carefully. With all due respect, Ravenna, she owes me money, Volkov said, his tone hardening. $200,000. That's business, not personal. Her husband owed you money, Marcus corrected. Her husband is dead. The debt died with him. That's not how we operate. Volkov leaned forward, his light blue eyes turning rigid. In my world, a debt is a debt. It doesn't matter who owes it. The family is responsible. That's the rule. That's your rule. Marcus took one step closer, and although he made no overt threat, Sergei and the other 2 men tensed instantly. You're on my territory. My rules are the only ones that matter here. Volkov stood up, his face flushing with anger. Who do you think you are to threaten me? I'm not one of your pawns you can crush. I've got my own men, my own guns, my own money. You can't touch me. Marcus didn't react to Volkov's anger. He simply stood there, calm as if they were discussing the weather. Then he did something that froze the entire room. He reached into his coat pocket. Sergei drew his gun immediately, aiming it straight at Marcus's head. Jerome and Vince drew theirs as well, the air snapping tight with tension. But Marcus didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a bullet. A single polished brass round, resting neatly in his palm. He placed it on the table, gently, metal tapping against metal in the silence. This one has your name on it, Marcus said, his voice no louder than a whisper yet somehow echoing through the warehouse. Every day you don't retreat. I'll add 1 more for every man in your organization. Volkov stared at the bullet, then at Marcus. For the first time, the arrogance in his eyes wavered. Are you threatening me? I'm informing you, Marcus replied. There's a difference. He stepped closer again, and this time Volkov stepped back despite himself. You have 72 hours, Marcus said. Return everything you took from her. Every dollar. Cancel the debt, then disappear from this city. And if I don't? Volkov asked, trying to recover his defiance, though his voice no longer held steady. Marcus didn't answer with words. He simply locked onto Volkov with an icy, unblinking stare that promised a slow and painful end. And in that gaze, Volkov saw something he had never encountered in all his years of crime. Absolute certainty. Marcus Ravenna didn't threaten. Marcus Ravenna promised. And the Silent King never broke a promise. Marcus turned and walked away, Jerome and Vince following. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Volkov stood there watching them go, the bullet still lying on the table, gleaming under the flickering neon light like a reminder of what awaited him if he chose wrong. 1 week passed in the Ravenna estate like a strange dream Sophia didn't dare believe was real. No one chased her away. No one demanded anything. No one knocked on the door in the middle of the night with threats. For the first time in months, maybe years, she woke up without the fear that something terrible was about to happen. Noah recovered faster than anyone had expected. Dr. Elena came to check on him every day for the first 3 days, then every other day after that. She said the baby was a fighter, that premature children often had more resilience than people imagined. Noah began feeding regularly, gaining weight, and crying louder. His cries no longer sent Sophia into panic. They made her smile, because crying meant life. Emma adapted the fastest. She explored the estate as if it were a castle from a fairy tale, running through the corridors, studying the paintings on the walls, asking Rosa hundreds of questions about everything. Rosa, despite her stern exterior, clearly had a soft spot for children. She taught Emma how to bake cookies in the kitchen, let her sit on the counter and mix dough while telling stories about faraway Italy. Lucas was different. The 4-year-old still didn't speak, still stared into empty space with eyes too old for his age. Sophia worried and asked Dr. Elena, who said it was a trauma response, that the boy needed time, needed safety, needed to know no one was going to hurt him anymore. Then on the 5th day, something close to a miracle happened. Jerome was walking through the snow-covered garden when Lucas saw him from the window. The boy ran outside without a word and simply stood there staring at the gray-haired man. Jerome stopped, looked down at him, then crouched. He shaped a small snowball and held it out to Lucas. The boy looked at the snowball, looked at Jerome, then did something that made Sophia, watching from the doorway, clamp a hand over her mouth to keep from crying out loud. Lucas smiled, a small, tentative smile, as if he'd forgotten how to do it. But it was a smile, the first in weeks. Jerome looked up, met Sophia's eyes, and gave a slight nod. Nothing needed to be said. They both understood how precious that moment was. Marcus was almost invisible throughout the week. He left the estate early, returned late, and when he was home, he stayed in his study or office. Sophia only caught glimpses of him, a tall figure passing through a hallway, gray eyes flicking briefly over her and the children before disappearing behind a door. He didn't speak to her, didn't check in, didn't join meals. As if he were deliberately keeping his distance, Emma was the first to ask about it. "Mommy, does Uncle Marcus not like us?" she asked one evening as Sophia was reading to the children. "Why do you think that?" Sophia asked. "Because he never talks to us," Emma shrugged. "He looks at us. I see it. But he doesn't come close. Like he's scared of us." Sophia didn't know how to answer. She wondered the same thing herself. Marcus Ravenna, a man powerful enough to make someone like Volkov tremble, avoided a 6-year-old girl and her 4-year-old brother. There was something here she didn't understand yet, some story hidden behind those cold gray eyes. And Emma, with a child's fearless curiosity, seemed determined to uncover the answer. It happened on the afternoon of the 8th day. Sophia was feeding Noah in the bedroom when she realized Emma wasn't there. Her daughter had been sitting on the floor only minutes earlier, drawing quietly while Lucas took his afternoon nap. Now the chair was empty, and the colored pencils lay scattered across the floor. Sophia placed the now sleeping Noah into the crib and stepped into the hallway, her heart beating a little faster. The estate was too large, too many rooms, too many places where a 6-year-old could wander and find trouble. She moved through the corridors, calling Emma's name softly, not wanting to raise alarm yet unable to suppress the growing unease. Rosa hadn't seen Emma. Jerome hadn't either. Panic began to rise. Then Sophia passed the study and stopped. The door was slightly open. She stepped closer, about to push it open and search for her daughter, when she heard voices, 2 of them. One was Emma's clear, innocent voice. The other was low and familiar, the voice she had first heard on the night of the snowstorm. "Marcus." Sophia remained outside the door, not entering, only watching through the narrow opening. Emma stood beside Marcus's desk, holding a small, framed photograph. Marcus sat in his chair, looking at her with an expression Sophia had never seen on him before. Not cold, not distant, but something else. Pain, helplessness, and something very close to fear. "Who is this?" Emma asked, her bright voice cutting through the silence. She looked so sad. Marcus didn't answer right away. He stared at the photograph in Emma's hands, and Sophia could see his jaw tighten, the muscles in his neck straining as if he were enduring something physical. "My sister," he finally said, his voice rougher than usual. Her name was Isabella. Emma tilted her head, studying the picture more closely. "Where is she now? Why isn't she here?" Silence followed, long, heavy. Sophia wanted to step in, pull Emma away, apologize for this intrusion, but her feet wouldn't move. "She's gone," Marcus said, each word sounding as if it were being dragged from his throat. "A long time ago. When I was a child." "Gone how?" Emma asked, with the innocent persistence of a child who doesn't yet know there are questions that shouldn't be asked. "Like going to sleep forever. Like my grandpa." Marcus looked at Emma, and in that moment, Sophia saw the walls he had built over so many years begin to crack. The sharp edges of his gaze softened, and for the first time, a shimmer of dampness broke through his defenses. Just a little, but enough for Sophia to see. "Yes," Marcus whispered, "like sleeping forever." Emma set the frame down and did something no one could have predicted. She stepped forward and hugged Marcus, small arms wrapped around the neck of the most powerful man in the Northeast. Without fear, without hesitation, just a simple hug from a 6-year-old child. "I'm sorry about your sister," Emma said, her voice serious as if she were speaking the most important truth in the world. "I have a little brother too. I'll protect Noah forever. I won't let anyone make him sleep forever." Marcus didn't move. He sat there, rigid, as if he didn't know what to do with the embrace. Sophia saw his hand tremble, then slowly, as if performing something he had forgotten how to do long ago, Marcus lifted his hand and rested it lightly on Emma's back. He didn't hug her back. He simply placed his hand there, but for this man, it was probably everything he could give. "You're a good big sister," Marcus said, his voice hoarse. "Your brother is lucky to have you." Emma pulled back, smiling brightly as if she'd just been praised for the greatest achievement imaginable. "You're good too," she said. "You saved my mommy and us. You're like a knight in a fairy tale, just without shiny armor." A strange sound escaped Marcus's throat. It took Sophia a few seconds to realize it was laughter. Soft, brief, but laughter. "I'm not a knight," Marcus said, though his voice carried less weight now. "Knights are good people." "I'm not. My mommy says good people help others." Emma tilted her head. "You helped us, so you're good. It's simple." Sophia looked at her daughter, a 6-year-old child who had used the simplest logic to crack what she suspected was the strongest defense Marcus Ravenna possessed. And she looked at Marcus, the man the entire underworld feared, sitting there staring at a child with the expression of someone seeing sunlight after years in darkness. She stepped back, choosing not to enter. Some moments don't need witnesses. Some wounds can only be healed by hands that don't know they're healing them. Emma had no idea what she had done. She had simply done what children do, offering love without conditions, without judgment, without fear. And sometimes, that is the only medicine capable of reaching the deepest wounds. Volkov didn't comply. 72 hours passed, and instead of retreating, he chose another path. The path arrogant men often choose when they're cornered. The path of blood. The 10th night at the Ravenna estate was as quiet as every other. Sophia had settled all 3 children to sleep. Noah in the crib beside her bed, Emma and Lucas in the large bed in the next room. She sat by the window for a while, looking out over the snow-covered garden under the moonlight, feeling something close to peace for the first time in years. She didn't know that outside, beyond the high walls and the security systems, 3 dark shapes were moving through the night. Not Volkov's men. Volkov was smart enough not to use his own. He hired outside contractors, men with no ties to him, no trails leading back, professionals, cold, men with no rules about women and children. Sophia woke to a sound, or maybe to the absence of sound, a sudden, heavy silence that felt wrong. The survival instinct she had honed over years with Daniel told her something was off. She sat up, heart pounding harder, ears straining. Nothing. Just the wind outside the window, but no footsteps from the guards on patrol, no engine noise from the garage, nothing at all. Sophia slipped out of bed, bare feet on the cold wooden floor. She went to Emma and Lucas's room and opened the door carefully. Both children were still asleep, breathing evenly. Relief washed over her, and she told herself she was imagining things, letting old fear take control. Then she saw it, a dark shape in the corner of the room. Not a shadow from furniture. A human shape. Sophia didn't have time to scream. The figure moved like a snake, one hand clamping over her mouth, the other wrenching her arm behind her back. She was yanked backward, lost her balance, hit the floor hard. Pain exploded at the back of her head. The world spun. The children. The thought cut through the dizziness, dragging her back from the edge of unconsciousness. Emma. Lucas. Sophia struggled, tried to scream, but the hand over her mouth was too strong. She bit, hard enough to taste blood. The attacker jerked his hand away, cursing in a language she didn't understand. She screamed once before a punch slammed into her face, pain bursting white behind her eyes. "Mommy," Emma's voice, her daughter calling her. Sophia forced her eyes open, tried to see through the pain and the blood running from a gash on her forehead. She saw Emma awake, sitting up in bed with wide, terrified eyes, and she saw a second dark figure moving toward her daughter. "No," Sophia screamed, her voice breaking. "Don't touch my child." She tried to get up and was kicked back down. Her head struck the floor. The world blurred, but she still saw, through fading vision, the second attacker grabbing Emma by the hair and dragging her off the bed. Emma screamed and fought, heart-tearing cries filling the night. Lucas curled into the corner of the bed, frozen in terror, slipping back into the silence he had only just escaped. Then the third attacker appeared in the doorway, tall, expressionless, a knife in his hand. He scanned the room, assessed the scene, then gave the order in a low, flat voice. "Take the girl, kill the rest. Clean, no traces." Something shattered inside Sophia, not fear. Fear had gone beyond its limit and turned into something else. Rage, fury, the instinct of a mother protecting her child. She twisted, grabbed the leg of the man pinning her, yanked hard. He lost balance and fell forward. Sophia snatched something from the floor, a bedside lamp, and smashed it against his head. Not hard enough to drop him, just hard enough to enrage him. He slapped her, so hard stars burst across her vision. Then he grabbed her hair, yanked her head back. The cold blade of the knife pressed against her throat. A drop of blood slid down. "Don't move," he growled, "or you die before the girl gets out of here." Sophia stopped struggling, not because of the knife at her throat, but because she saw Emma. Her 6-year-old daughter was being held tight by the second attacker, another knife pressed to her small neck. Emma wasn't crying anymore. She looked at her mother with tear-filled eyes, lips pressed together, brave. She was trying to be brave for her mother. That broke Sophia's heart more than any blade ever could. "I'm sorry," Sophia whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, baby." "It's okay, Mommy," Emma replied, her voice shaking but unbroken. "The night will come." The attacker sneered. "There's no night, kid. This isn't a fairy tale." The words had barely left his mouth when the door exploded inward. Not opened, blown open, as if kicked by a storm itself, and in the doorway stood Marcus Ravenna, gun in hand, gray eyes no longer cold. They were burning with a fury Sophia had never seen in another human being. Everything happened in seconds, but to Sophia it felt like a lifetime. Marcus fired twice, precise, cold, without hesitation. The man holding Sophia collapsed, the knife slipping from his hand as blood spread across the wooden floor. The third attacker, the leader standing in the doorway, reacted faster, drawing his gun and firing back. Marcus shifted aside, his shoulder slamming into the wall, and fired again. The bullet tore through the man's thigh, ripping a scream from his throat as he went down, still squeezing the trigger. Bullets flew wildly. Sophia threw herself over Lucas, shielding the boy with her body, her heart pounding like a war drum. But the most dangerous one was still standing. The man holding Emma dragged her into the center of the room, the blade still pressed to her fragile throat, using her small body as a shield. "Stop," he shouted, panic in his voice, though his grip stayed firm. "Stop, or I'll slit the girl's throat." Marcus stood in the middle of the room, gun aimed at the assassin and the tiny hostage. Too close to shoot without hitting Emma. Too far to rush him before the blade cut down. A deadly stalemate. "Put her down," Marcus said, his voice strangely calm amid the chaos. Not a plea, a statement. "Who the hell do you think you are?" The assassin sneered, but the sound shook. "You shoot me. The kid dies first." Marcus didn't fire. He let the gun fall. The sound of metal hitting wood rang out in the sudden silence. Sophia stopped breathing. Emma sobbed softly, her eyes locked on Marcus like he was her last hope. And Marcus looked back at her, his gray eyes no longer burning. They were still, controlled, lethal, in a different way. "Look at me," Marcus said to the assassin, his voice low and even like a death bell. "If you so much as scratch her skin, I'll make it take you 3 days to die. And every second of those 3 days, you'll beg to die sooner." The assassin met Marcus's gaze, and he saw what Sophia saw too. Not an empty threat, not reckless anger, but truth. Cold, absolute, unmovable truth. Marcus Ravenna did what he said, and the man knew it. His hand trembled, the blade trembled with it. He opened his mouth to speak, maybe to bargain, maybe to surrender. He never got the chance. Jerome appeared behind him like a ghost, moving silently through the shattered window no one had noticed. One arm locked around the assassin's throat, the other clamped down on the hand holding the knife. A sharp twist, the sound of bone breaking. The man screamed, the knife clattered to the floor, and Emma was free. She stumbled forward and ran, not to her mother, to Marcus, Uncle Knight. Emma screamed, throwing herself into him with all the strength of her small body. Her arms wrapped around his neck, her face buried against his shoulder, and she cried, uncontrollably, like all the fear she'd held inside had finally been released. Marcus stood frozen, his hands hovering in the air like he didn't know where to put them. He looked down at Emma's blonde hair, felt her shaking against him, and something inside him shattered. The wall he'd built for 24 years, the armor he'd worn since the night his mother and Isabella died, all of it cracked under the weight of a 6-year-old calling him a knight. Slowly, like he was doing something he'd forgotten how to do long ago, Marcus put his hand on Emma's back. Then he pulled her into him, held her tight, like he was holding the sister he'd failed to save all those years ago. "You're safe now," he whispered, his voice rough. "No one will ever touch you again. I promise." Sophia sat on the floor, Lucas pressed against her chest, blood running from the wound on her head, and watched the most dangerous man she'd ever known hold her daughter with a tenderness she never imagined he possessed. She cried, not knowing if it was from pain, from fear, from relief, or from something else she wasn't ready to name. That night, after Dr. Elena bandaged Sophia's wounds and checked the children, after Emma finally loosened her grip on Marcus and fell asleep in her mother's arms, after the house settled back into silence, Marcus called a meeting, not in the basement war room, but in the main hall, where every senior member of the Ravenna family stood present. Jerome stood at Marcus's right, his face unreadable, but his eyes burning low and fierce. Vince stood at his left, raw anger etched across his features, every earlier objection erased by the sight of 3 children nearly slaughtered under their roof. Carlo sat in his chair, old but sharp, waiting. "Erase them," Marcus said. 2 short words carrying the weight of a death sentence. No one asked what he meant. No one needed clarification. That night, Nikolai Volkov's empire collapsed. Sophia didn't know the details. She didn't need to. But Jerome told her the next morning when he came to check on her and the children. He spoke evenly, without emotion, like he was delivering a weather report. Every Volkov operation was dismantled within 6 hours. The underground casinos, the storage warehouses, the loan shark offices, all of it burned or was destroyed. Volkov's men, the ones who directly threatened and exploited victims, were taken. Not to the police, to the people they'd harmed. Sergei, the bear-sized assassin, was found at his home with evidence linking him to 12 murders. Dmitry, the accountant, was caught trying to flee to Canada with 2 suitcases of cash. And Volkov, Nikolai Volkov, was found in a hidden apartment on the outskirts of the city, where he'd gone into hiding after ordering the attack on the Ravenna estate. He was taken to an abandoned warehouse, the same place where his meeting with Marcus had happened less than 2 weeks earlier. But this time, Volkov didn't sit in control. He knelt on the cold concrete, hands bound behind his back, face swollen from the beating he'd taken on the way. Marcus stood before him, gray eyes like ice. "I gave you 72 hours, Marcus said calmly, as if discussing the weather. "You used that time to send killers into my home, to try to kidnap a 6-year-old child, to try to murder a mother and her 2 remaining children." Volkov spat blood onto the floor, forcing defiance into his voice though his body shook. "What do you think you'll do?" he snarled. "Kill me? That won't change anything. Someone else will take my place. There's always someone else." Marcus tilted his head, studying Volkov like an insect. "You think I'm going to kill you?" he asked, a cold smile flickering across his mouth. "No, I'm not going to kill you." Volkov blinked, confused. For the first time, a spark of hope appeared in his eyes. Marcus gestured, and the warehouse door opened. A group of people entered. Not Marcus's men, others. People Sophia didn't know, but Volkov knew very well. A middle-aged man with hollow eyes from years without sleep, the father of a 17-year-old girl who'd been kidnapped and sold by Volkov's men 3 years earlier. A gaunt woman with white hair, though she was barely 40. The wife of a debtor Sergei had beaten to death for failing to pay. A 20-year-old man with a scar running down his face, forced to work for Volkov to repay his father's debt, witness to too many horrors, and more. Over 20 people, all direct or indirect victims of Nikolai Volkov and his organization. They stood there, staring at the man who'd destroyed their lives, kneeling before them. "No," Volkov whispered, real fear finally breaking through. "No, you can't do this." Marcus stepped back, clearing the space for the victims. "I'm not doing anything," he said coldly. "I'm just returning you to where you belong, to the people you created." Then he turned and walked away, not looking back, leaving Volkov with the lives he'd shattered. Volkov's screams echoed through the warehouse as Marcus stepped outside. He didn't listen. He didn't need to. Justice doesn't always come from courts or police. Sometimes, it comes from those pushed beyond their final limit. And Marcus was simply the one who opened the door. 3 days passed after the night of the attack. The Ravenna estate was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. There was no longer any underlying tension, no threat hanging in the air. Volkov was gone, his empire reduced to ashes, and the news spread through the underworld like wildfire. No one dared touch those protected by the Silent King. Sophia knew that. She also knew the price of that protection. Jerome hadn't shared details, but she wasn't naive. She understood what had happened to Volkov and his men. She understood what Marcus had done, and she needed to talk to him about it. She found Marcus in the study, standing by the window, looking out over the snow-covered garden. He wore a black shirt, sleeves rolled up to reveal the tattoos running along his arms. When she entered, he didn't turn around, but she knew he was aware of her presence. "How are the children?" he asked, still looking outside. "Emma didn't have nightmares last night," Sophia replied, standing in the middle of the room. "Lucas has started speaking again. Noah is still doing well." "Good." 1 word. Short. "Very, Marcus." Silence stretched between them. Sophia took a deep breath and said what she'd come to say. "I know what you did." He turned, gray eyes meeting hers. No denial, no explanation, just watching and waiting. "Volkov." Sophia continued, her voice steadier than she expected. "I know you killed people. Or at least, you let others do it. I didn't kill Volkov, Marcus said calmly. I gave him to the people he hurt. Is that really any different? Sophia asked. To you, maybe. Marcus moved toward the desk, his hand sliding over the wood. To you, maybe not. What do you want to say, Sophia? Say it. Sophia looked at him. The man who had saved her and her children. The man who had held Emma while she cried. The man whose eyes had filled with pain at the sight of his lost sister's photograph. And also the man who could order the destruction of an empire in a single night without his hands trembling. I should be afraid of you, she said. You should. Marcus replied without hesitation. But I'm not. Sophia shook her head. And what does that mean? Marcus studied her for a long moment, then exhaled. A rare sound of weariness from a man who always seemed in control. It means you've survived too much to fear things that no longer threaten you. He sat down, for the first time looking like an ordinary man instead of a kingpin. I'm not a good man, Sophia, he said quietly and honestly. I've killed people. Many people. I've done things you couldn't imagine. And I don't regret most of them. Why? Sophia asked. Why do you live this life? Because I didn't have another choice. Marcus glanced at the photograph of his sister on the desk. Or maybe I once did, but it was taken from me when I was 13. My mother and my sister were murdered in front of me, by men my father owed money to. My father took his own life a week later. My grandfather raised me, trained me, turned me into what you see now. Sophia said nothing. She just listened. I swore I'd never let that happen to another child if I could stop it, Marcus went on. That's the one rule I've never broken. Women and children are never touched. And when Volkov threatened Emma, he stopped, his jaw tightening. He crossed a line I don't allow anyone to cross. Sophia understood then. She understood why he'd saved her during the snowstorm. Why he'd confronted Volkov. Why he'd reacted with such fury when Emma was threatened. It wasn't because of her. It was because of Isabella. Because of the sister he couldn't save 24 years ago. Thank you, Sophia said softly. For everything you've done. You don't owe me thanks. I know. Sophia smiled faintly. That's why I'm saying it. She stepped closer, standing across from him. But I can't stay here forever. The children need a normal life. A normal home. School. Friends. The things children are supposed to have. Not a mansion with guards and guns. Marcus nodded, unsurprised, as if he'd expected this. I understand. He stood, went to a file cabinet, and took out an envelope. An apartment on the east side. Safe, close to good schools. The rent is paid for a year, and a job with a non-profit organization that protects abused women. If you want it, Sophia looked at the envelope, then at Marcus. You already planned this. I knew you wouldn't stay. Marcus said. You're stronger than you think. You don't need someone protecting you forever. You just need a chance to stand on your own. Sophia took the envelope, feeling the weight of a new beginning in her hands. I won't forget what you've done, she said. I didn't do it to be remembered, Marcus replied. And for the first time, Sophia saw something in his eyes that wasn't darkness or pain. It was peace, just a little. But it was there. The apartment on the east side was much smaller than the Ravenna estate, with only 2 bedrooms, a combined living room and kitchen, and a single bathroom. But to Sophia, it was heaven. It was hers, not Daniel's, not her mother-in-law's, not Marcus's. It was the place where she stood on her own 2 feet and built a new life for herself and her children. The first week was the hardest. Sophia woke in the middle of the night from nightmares, reaching for the children to make sure they were still there. She flinched at every unfamiliar sound in the hallway, her heart racing whenever someone knocked on the door. But no one came to threaten her. There was no Volkov, no men working for him, only friendly neighbors, delivery drivers, and sometimes the elderly landlady bringing pastries for the children. The job at the non-profit began in the 2nd week. Safe Haven, that was the organization's name, dedicated to helping women and children escape domestic violence. Sophia was hired into an administrative role, handling paperwork, scheduling appointments, and sometimes helping receive new women who arrived with frightened eyes and bruises they tried to hide. She understood them. She had been them. And that made the work meaningful in a way no job she'd had before ever was. Emma started school in the 3rd week. The public elementary school was 2 blocks away, close enough for Sophia to walk her there every morning. On the first day, Emma clung tightly to her mother's hand at the school gate, her wide eyes full of worry. But by the end of the week, she had 2 new friends and came home chattering about her kind teacher, a new song she'd learned, and a picture she'd drawn in art class. Lucas began daycare around the same time. He still spoke less than the other children and sometimes stared off into space with distant eyes, but he was talking. He was smiling. He was playing with other kids. The psychologist Sophia took him to each week, said he was recovering well, and that children had an astonishing ability to heal when placed in a safe and loving environment. Noah grew quickly. The fragile, premature baby was now nearly 6 months old, with chubby cheeks, plump arms and legs, and a cry loud enough to fill the apartment whenever he was hungry. Elena still came to check on him every 2 weeks, even though Sophia knew it wasn't her obligation. She said she wanted to monitor Noah's development, but Sophia suspected someone had asked her to do it. She didn't ask. She didn't need to. Jerome appeared from time to time, never entering the apartment, only standing at the corner of the street or sitting in a parked car a few houses away. Sophia knew he was there. She knew it was Marcus's way of keeping his promise to protect her without intruding on her new life. She didn't object. Jerome's quiet presence brought a sense of safety she wasn't ready to fully let go of. 2 months passed like a dream. Sophia grew accustomed to the new rhythm of life. Mornings meant waking up, making breakfast for the children, walking Emma and Lucas to school and daycare, then going to work with Noah in a stroller because the organization allowed her to bring her baby. Afternoons meant picking up the children, coming home to cook dinner, reading stories to them before bed. A normal life, the life she had dreamed of for years while married to Daniel but never had. One evening, 2 months after leaving the estate, Emma came to Sophia holding a piece of paper folded into quarters and an envelope. "Mom, I want to send this to Uncle Marcus," the girl said, her blue eyes serious. "Can you help me?" Sophia looked at the paper, then at her daughter. "What did you write?" "A letter," Emma replied as if it were the most obvious thing in the world, and I drew a picture too. "I want him to know we're okay." Sophia opened the paper. Inside was a letter written in the clumsy handwriting of a child just learning to write. Full of spelling mistakes, but so sincere it made her throat tighten. "Dear Uncle Marcus, it's Emma. I miss you. I hope you're not sad anymore. I drew you and Isabella. I think she wants you to be happy. Mom says people who pass away still watch us from the sky. I think Isabella is watching you and she's proud because you saved us. I'll be a good big sister like you said. I love you, Emma." With the letter was a drawing. Messy, wildly colored, the proportions completely wrong like any 6-year-old's artwork. But Sophia recognized it instantly. A tall, dark-haired man standing beside a smaller girl, both smiling. Above them was a bright yellow sun and the crooked word, happy. Marcus and Isabella, she guessed. Emma had given Marcus something he probably never dared imagine. His sister was happy. She was smiling. She was with him again, if only on paper. Sophia pulled her daughter into her arms, tears streaming down her face without trying to hide them. "You're the most wonderful child in the world. You know that?" she whispered. "I'll send the letter to Uncle Marcus. I promise." Rosa was the one who delivered the letter. Sophia didn't know how Marcus reacted when he received it. She didn't ask, but a few days later, Jerome came to see her and said only one sentence before leaving. He placed the drawing beside his sister's photo. Sophia nodded, understanding what that meant. Emma, with a child's innocence and unconditional love, had given Marcus something no one else had since Isabella died. Forgiveness, not forgiveness for something he had done wrong, but forgiveness of himself for not being able to save his sister that day. And sometimes, that was the most precious gift anyone could ever receive. 5 months have passed since that fateful snowstorm night. 5 months of recovery, healing, and rebuilding from the ashes. Sophia sits in her familiar coffee shop near the apartment, the place she comes every Saturday morning while the children play in the park across the street. Noah sleeps peacefully in the stroller beside her, while Emma and Lucas run across the playground, their laughter drifting through the glass windows. She takes a sip of coffee and looks outside with a quiet, contented smile. Life has changed in so many ways. She has been promoted at Safe Haven and now works as a victim support coordinator, a role she loves because it allows her to help women who were once exactly where she had been. Emma is doing well in school, praised by her teacher, surrounded by close friends, and no longer haunted by nightmares. Lucas speaks normally now, and has even joined a neighborhood youth soccer team. Noah is healthy and chubby, already rolling over and laughing whenever he sees his mother. They survived. Not just survived, but truly lived. The cafe bell rings as someone enters, bringing a rush of cold air from outside. Sophia looks up and her heart skips a beat. Marcus Ravenna stands in the doorway, wearing his familiar black coat, his dark hair threaded with a few strands of gray she doesn't remember seeing before. His gray eyes scan the room and stop on her. Surprise flickers across his face, then something else. Joy, caution. She lifts her hand in a small wave, and he walks over. Coincidence or intention, she doesn't know, and she doesn't care. "May I sit?" he asks, standing beside the table with a courtesy she has never seen from him before. Please. Sophia smiles. Marcus sits down and orders black coffee when the server approaches. They sit in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the children play through the window. They look healthy. Marcus speaks first. Emma has grown taller. Yes. Sophia nods. She received a school scholarship for academic excellence. Lucas joined a soccer team and has his first match next week. Noah has been sleeping through the night for 2 months now. And you? Sophia thinks for a moment before answering. I'm well. Truly well. Not the kind of well people say to avoid explaining, but genuinely well. I have a job I love, a home of my own, and healthy, happy children. I rebuilt my life from the ground up, and this time it belongs to me. Marcus looks at her, and in his unwavering look, she found a deep, silent sense of pride. Not pride in himself, but pride in her. I knew you'd do it, he says. You're stronger than you think. Sophia looks at him, the man who changed her life in ways no one could have predicted. I want to thank you, she says sincerely, for everything, not just for saving us that night, but for giving me the space to stand on my own. You didn't try to control me, didn't demand anything, didn't turn me into a debtor of your kindness. You helped, then stepped back. That meant more than you know. Marcus is silent for a moment, turning the untouched coffee cup in his hand. You don't owe me thanks, he replies. I know, Sophia smiles. That's why I'm saying it. Will you stay? She asks when she sees him preparing to stand. Marcus shakes his head gently. I don't belong in the world you're building, Sophia. That world is clean. Good. And I'm not. Who says? Marcus looks at her with eyes that are sad but calm. Experience. He stands, leaving money on the table for the coffee he never drank. But before he leaves, he pauses. If you or the children ever need anything, at any time, you know how to reach me. I know. Sophia stands and does something she has wanted to do for a long time. She steps forward and hugs him. A brief, gentle hug, asking for nothing. Just a thank you. Just a goodbye. Just an acknowledgement of how much he mattered to her and her children. Marcus stiffens for a second, then places a hand on her back and pats twice before letting go. Take good care of the children, he says, his voice rougher than usual. Always. He leaves, his tall figure disappearing through the glass door. Sophia watches him go, not sad, not regretful, only grateful and understanding. Some people enter your life like a storm, fierce and transformative, then withdraw. They leave you changed, stronger, but ultimately free. Marcus Ravenna was her storm, and she survived. Mom, Emma's voice calls from outside. Come watch me go down the slide. Sophia steps out of the cafe, the cold air wrapping around her but no longer frightening like it was months ago. Snow begins to fall, gentle and beautiful. Nothing like the violent storm that nearly took her life and her children's. This is the kind of snow that transforms the world without trying to erase it. She crosses the street to the park, where Emma waves excitedly from the top of the slide, and Lucas climbs the ladder. Noah stirs in the stroller, waking with soft sounds demanding attention. Sophia lifts him, kisses his cheek, and stands there in the falling snow, watching her 2 older children play, as their laughter echoes through the air. This is her life now. Not perfect, not a fairy tale, but hers, chosen, built, fought for. The storm showed her that she could survive. The months that followed taught her who she could become. Power reveals who you choose to protect. Fear is loud, but responsibility is quiet. And sometimes, the most dangerous man in the room is the one who decides that a line will never be crossed again, then steps away once the work is done. Sophia looks up at the sky as snowflakes fall like tiny miracles, and feels something she hasn't felt in a very long time. Peace. Not because the world is safe, but because she finally believes she can face whatever comes next. And her children, playing, laughing, living, are proof that belief matters. The road that almost ended everything led her here, to this moment, to herself. And that is enough. This story reminds us that no matter how deeply life pushes you into darkness, no matter how alone or hopeless you feel, there is always light at the end of the tunnel. Sometimes that light comes from places you least expect. Sometimes the one who saves you is the person the world calls dangerous. Because people can't be judged by appearances or reputations, but by what they do when no one is watching, by the lines they choose not to cross, and by the people they choose to protect. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel, like, and share the video so we can continue bringing meaningful stories to you every day. How did this story make you feel? Did it remind you of someone in your real life? Has there ever been someone who entered your life like a storm and became a miracle? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. We would truly love to hear what's in your heart. We wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace every single day. Thank you for being with us. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video.